I never expected my brother's condescending comments about my children to lead to the most humbling moment of his life. But sometimes the universe has a way of teaching lessons when you least expect it, especially when those lessons involve a decorated Navy Admiral and two very special grandchildren. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air in suburban Richmond, Virginia, carried the scent of burning leaves as I stood in my brother Marcus's pristine driveway, watching my 8-year-old twins, Emma and Jake, play with their cousins in his perfectly manicured backyard. It was supposed to be a simple family barbecue, a chance for the kids to connect during one of our brief stateside periods before David's next deployment. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the afternoon would spiral into a confrontation that would forever change how my family viewed our military lifestyle. "Sarah, seriously, when are you going to give those kids some stability?" Marcus asked, appearing beside me with a beer in hand, and that familiar expression of barely concealed disapproval. He gestured toward Emma and Jake, who were enthusiastically teaching their sedentary cousins a game they'd learned for military children in Okinawa. "Look at them. They don't even know how to play normal American games." I watched my children with a mixture of pride and defensive concern. Emma was patiently explaining the rules of a complex strategy game that required quick thinking and adaptability, while Jake was demonstrating martial arts moves he'd picked up during our years stationed in South Korea. They moved with a confidence and cultural awareness that I found remarkable in children so young. But I could see how their sophisticated play might seem foreign to Marcus's sheltered suburban kids. "They're playing just fine," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the familiar sting of his criticism. "Emma and Jake have friends all over the world. They're more adaptable and culturally aware than most adults I know." Marcus snorted, taking a long drink from his beer. "Adaptable? Sarah, they've lived in 6 different places in 8 years. Emma told me yesterday that she can't remember which base she was born on. That's not adaptable, that's rootless. These kids don't have a hometown. They don't have childhood friends they've known for years. They don't even have a consistent school system." His words hit exactly where he intended them to. The guilt that every military spouse carries about the sacrifices our children make for our service had been a constant companion throughout Emma and Jake's childhood. Every move, every tearful goodbye to new friends, every adjustment to different schools and cultures had weighed on my conscience, even as I watched my children develop resilience and worldliness that amazed everyone they met. "David and I are providing them with experiences that most children never get," I said, though I could hear the defensive edge creeping into my voice. "They speak 3 languages, they've lived in 4 different countries, they understand global perspectives that—" "Global perspectives?" Marcus interrupted with a laugh that made my stomach clench. "Sarah, they're 8 years old. They need stability, not passport stamps. They need little league teams they can stay on for more than 1 season, neighborhood friends they can have sleepovers with for more than twice a year." He paused, and I could see him building up to whatever devastating observation he'd been saving for maximum impact. This was Marcus's specialty, the carefully constructed comment designed to make me question everything I thought I knew about my own life choices. "You and David are so caught up in this military adventure fantasy that you're forgetting what's best for your children. These kids are going to grow up without any sense of home or belonging. They're military brats, Sarah, and that's not something to be proud of. It's something that's going to damage them for the rest of their lives." The term military brats, delivered with such obvious disdain, felt like a physical slap. In military communities, being a military brat was a badge of honor, a recognition of the unique strengths and perspectives that come from a childhood spent serving your country alongside your parents. But coming from Marcus, it sounded like an accusation of neglect, a suggestion that David and I were prioritizing our own careers over our children's well-being. "You don't understand what you're talking about," I said, my voice quieter now, but carrying a steel that Marcus had probably never heard before. "Emma and Jake are thriving. They're confident, independent, culturally competent children who can adapt to any situation. That's not damage, that's strength." Marcus shook his head with the patient condescension of someone explaining basic facts to a child. Sarah, I make $340,000 a year as a senior partner at Richmond's most prestigious law firm. My kids go to elite private schools. They have trust funds. They're growing up in a community where they'll have connections for life. That's what stability looks like. That's how you give children advantages. He gestured toward his own children, 10-year-old Madison and 12-year-old Connor, who were standing awkwardly on the sidelines of Emma and Jake's energetic game, clearly unsure how to participate in something that required more physical activity than video games. Look at them. They don't even know how to play normal American games. I glanced at Madison and Connor, both pale and soft from their privileged indoor lifestyle, both struggling to keep up with my athletic, confident twins. Madison was whining about the complexity of the game Emma was teaching, while Connor had already given up trying to match Jake's martial arts demonstrations. They seemed like nice children, but they also seemed helpless in any situation that wasn't carefully controlled and structured by adults. Success isn't just about money and connections, I replied, though I could feel the familiar doubt creeping in. Was Marcus right? Had David and I been selfish in choosing military careers that required constant relocations? Were we inadvertently harming our children by exposing them to constant change instead of providing the stability that traditional families offered? Of course you'd say that, Marcus said with a dismissive wave. But let's be realistic, Sarah. David's been in the Navy for 12 years and he's still just a lieutenant commander. At this rate, he'll retire as a mid-level officer with a modest pension and no real career prospects in the civilian world. Meanwhile, you're working part-time jobs at whatever base you're stationed at, never building any real professional momentum because you have to start over every 2 or 3 years. The criticism stung because it contained just enough truth to be genuinely painful. David's military career had been distinguished but not meteoric, and the constant relocations had indeed made it difficult for me to build the kind of sustained career momentum that Marcus had achieved in his legal practice. But Marcus was measuring our success by his own narrow criteria, ignoring the profound satisfaction that came from serving something larger than ourselves. "We're serving our country," I said, knowing even as I spoke that Marcus would find a way to diminish that contribution. David is protecting American interests around the world, and I'm supporting that mission while raising children who understand what service and sacrifice mean. Marcus's expression shifted to something that looked almost pitying. Sarah, I'm not criticizing patriotism. I'm talking about practical realities. You're 34 years old, David is 36, and you're both still living like college students, moving every few years, renting base housing, accumulating no real assets or community connections. What happens when David retires from the military? What skills will you have developed? What professional network will you have built? What kind of stability will you be able to provide for Emma and Jake when they're teenagers who need consistency for college preparation? The questions were devastating because they echoed my own private fears about our family's future. Military families face unique challenges when transitioning to civilian life, and I had watched other military spouses struggle to re-establish careers after years of supporting their partner's service. But hearing these concerns articulated by someone who had never understood the value of military service felt like betrayal rather than helpful perspective. David has leadership experience and technical skills that translate perfectly to civilian careers, I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. And I've been developing project management and organizational skills that are valuable in any industry. Project management? Marcus laughed again, that same dismissive sound that had been punctuating our conversation like verbal punctuation marks. Sarah, you're a volunteer coordinator for base activities. That's not professional experience, that's hobby leadership. When you move to the next base, none of that experience transfers. You'll start over again as a newcomer with no local connections and no relevant work history. As he spoke, I became aware that his voice was carrying across the backyard, and other family members were beginning to pay attention to our conversation.
Marcus's wife, Jennifer, was pretending to organize the buffet table while obviously listening, and my parents were exchanging concerned glances from their lawn chairs. The last thing I wanted was for this private argument to become a public family spectacle, but Marcus seemed energized by having an audience for his criticism. "The most damaging part," he continued, raising his voice slightly to ensure everyone could hear, "is what you're doing to Emma and Jake. These children don't understand stability. They think it's normal to say goodbye to friends every 2 years. They think it's normal to live in temporary housing and attend schools where they're always the new kids. They're developing attachment issues that are going to affect their ability to form lasting relationships as adults." That accusation crossed a line that I hadn't realized existed until he stepped over it. Questioning my career choices was one thing, but suggesting that David and I were psychologically damaging our children was an attack I couldn't let stand unchallenged. "Emma and Jake are remarkable children," I said, my voice rising to match his volume. "They're confident, resilient, and adaptable in ways that your children will never be. They can walk into any room, in any country, and make friends within hours. They can handle change and uncertainty better than most adults. They're growing up to be global citizens with perspectives that will serve them for their entire lives." "Global citizens," Marcus repeated, mockingly. "Sarah, they're American children who need American childhoods. They need to grow up in American communities with American values and American stability. This fantasy about worldliness and cultural awareness is just rationalization for the chaos you're putting them through." The argument was attracting more attention now, and I could see other family members beginning to choose sides in a conflict that had escalated far beyond what anyone had expected from a casual family barbecue. But what I noticed most was that Emma and Jake had stopped playing and were watching our argument with the kind of mature attention that children develop when they're accustomed to adult conversations about their future. "Mom," Emma said, approaching us with the careful diplomacy she'd learned from years of navigating complex social situations, "Uncle Marcus seems upset about something. Should Jake and I go play somewhere else?"
The question demonstrated exactly the kind of emotional intelligence and social awareness that military children develop from constantly adapting to new environments. Emma had accurately read the tension in our conversation and was offering to remove herself and her brother from a situation that might be uncomfortable for the adults. It was sophisticated social navigation that most 8-year-olds would never think to attempt. But Marcus interpreted her question differently. "See," he said, addressing me while gesturing toward Emma, "she's already learning to avoid conflict instead of addressing it directly. That's what happens when children grow up in environments where everything is temporary and provisional. They learn to retreat instead of engaging." It was such a fundamental misreading of what had just happened that I felt momentarily speechless. Emma hadn't been retreating from conflict. She'd been demonstrating the kind of mature social awareness that comes from exposure to diverse cultures and complex social situations. She was managing adult emotions with skills that many adults never develop. "Emma," I said, crouching down to her eye level, "Uncle Marcus and I are having a discussion about different ways families can live. There's nothing for you to worry about, and you and Jake can keep playing if you want." Emma nodded seriously, but I could see her processing the conversation she'd overheard. "Mom, is Uncle Marcus saying that military families aren't good families?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Marcus realizing that his criticism had been overheard by the very children he claimed to be concerned about. For the first time since our argument began, he looked slightly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. "Of course not, sweetheart," he said, his tone shifting to something more appropriate for addressing a child. "I just think that maybe your mom and dad could find ways to give you and Jake more stability, that's all." But Emma was too smart to be deflected by diplomatic language. "What kind of stability?" she asked with genuine curiosity. "We have our family, and Dad's job helps protect people,
and we get to learn about different countries and cultures. That seems pretty stable to me." It was the kind of response that would have made any military parent proud, demonstrating the resilience and perspective that come from a childhood spent in service to something larger than immediate comfort. But I could see that Marcus interpreted Emma's response as evidence of children who had been taught to rationalize instability rather than recognizing it as genuine wisdom from a young person who had learned valuable lessons about what really matters in life. As the afternoon continued and the argument gradually subsided into uncomfortable family politeness, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about the choices David and I had made for our family. Were we really providing Emma and Jake with valuable experiences, or were we justifying selfish career decisions by convincing ourselves that constant relocations were somehow beneficial for children? But what I didn't know, as I wrestled with these doubts while watching my children play with their cousins, was that the next day would bring a visit that would completely reframe not just my perspective on our family's choices, but Marcus's understanding of exactly who Emma and Jake's family really was. The distinguished gentleman who would be picking up my children from their temporary Richmond school would carry credentials that would make Marcus's prestigious law practice seem like a neighborhood dispute resolution service, and the conversation that would follow would teach my successful attorney brother some very important lessons about the difference between civilian achievement and military honor. Sometimes the most profound revelations come not from winning arguments, but from discovering that the arguments themselves were based on fundamentally incomplete information. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The morning after Marcus's barbecue confrontation, I found myself sitting in the kitchen of our temporary rental house in Richmond, nursing my second cup of coffee while David prepared for his daily briefings at the Pentagon. The argument with my brother still echoed in my mind, but the familiar rhythm of military family morning routines provided a comforting structure that helped ground my swirling thoughts. "How are you feeling about yesterday?" David asked, adjusting his dress blue uniform in the hallway mirror. Even after 12 years of marriage, I still felt a flutter of pride watching him prepare for duty. His ribbons told the story of deployments to the Persian Gulf, humanitarian missions in the Philippines, and counter-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia. Each colored bar represented months of separation, dangerous assignments, and service to ideals larger than personal comfort. "Honestly, I keep wondering if Marcus has a point," I admitted, watching Emma and Jake efficiently pack their school backpacks with the systematic organization that military children develop from years of frequent relocations. David paused in his uniform adjustments, his expression growing serious. "Sarah, yesterday you were telling me about Emma's presentation on global water scarcity issues that impressed her entire class. Last week, Jake mediated a playground dispute between kids who couldn't communicate because of language barriers. These aren't the achievements of damaged children." He was right, of course. Emma and Jake's current school in Richmond had been amazed by their capabilities. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had called just 3 days ago to discuss placing Emma in the Gifted and Talented program after only 6 weeks in their school system. Jake's physical education instructor had recommended him for the Advanced Martial Arts Club, noting his discipline and respect for others that stood out even among older students.
Mrs. Rodriguez said Emma's essay about living in different cultures was the most sophisticated writing she'd seen from a third grader in 15 years of teaching, I continued, beginning to feel more confident about our family's choices. She asked if Emma had ever considered entering the statewide essay competition for elementary students. David smiled as he gathered his briefcase and car keys. And Jake's math teacher mentioned that his problem-solving approach is completely unique. She said he thinks about mathematical concepts from angles that reflect different educational systems and cultural approaches to learning. The truth was that Emma and Jake's academic performance had been consistently exceptional wherever we'd been stationed. In Okinawa, they'd excelled in a Department of Defense school that emphasized cross-cultural competency and global awareness.
In South Korea, they'd thrived in an international school environment where students from dozens of countries collaborated on projects that required sophisticated cultural sensitivity. In Norfolk, they'd been placed in advanced programs that challenged them intellectually while accommodating their unique educational backgrounds. But beyond academics, there were countless examples of the remarkable capabilities that military children develop through exposure to diverse environments and constant adaptation challenges. Emma could navigate airport security procedures that confused many adults, pack a suitcase efficiently for any climate, and introduce herself confidently into strangers in 3 different languages. Jake could read maps, understand time zones, and explain complex geopolitical relationships that most adults never bothered to learn. "Remember the incident at Jake's school in Norfolk?" David asked, checking his watch. "When that new student from Guatemala was having trouble adjusting, and Jake spent his lunch periods helping him practice English and teaching him American playground games?" I smiled at the memory. Jake had noticed that Miguel Santos was eating lunch alone because other children couldn't communicate with him effectively. Instead of ignoring the situation, Jake had appointed himself as an unofficial cultural liaison, using his rudimentary Spanish and remarkable emotional intelligence to help Miguel integrate into their class. Within 2 weeks, Miguel had a circle of friends and was participating actively in classroom discussions. The school counselor said she'd never seen an 8-year-old demonstrate that level of cultural empathy and leadership, I recalled. She asked if we'd be interested in having Jake participate in a peer mediation training program. These weren't isolated incidents. Throughout their young lives, Emma and Jake had consistently demonstrated the kind of global citizenship and adaptive leadership that international organizations spend millions of dollars trying to develop in their adult employees. They could order food in restaurants where no one spoke English, navigate foreign transportation systems, and adjust to new social norms with remarkable speed and grace. More importantly, they seemed to genuinely enjoy the challenges that came with their lifestyle. Emma often talked about her friends in different countries and maintained pen pal relationships with children she'd met during our various assignments. Jake collected cultural artifacts from each place we'd lived and could explain the historical significance of everything from Japanese origami to Korean traditional music to Philippine martial arts. "David, do you think we're really doing the right thing?" I asked, seeking reassurance that I couldn't quite provide for myself. Marcus made it sound like we're being selfish, prioritizing our careers over what's best for the children. David sat down across from me at our small kitchen table, his expression growing more serious. "Sarah, let me tell you about my briefing yesterday at the Pentagon. We were discussing naval intelligence operations in the South China Sea, and Admiral Patterson specifically mentioned that modern military strategy requires officers who understand international cultural dynamics and can work effectively with allied forces from dozens of different countries." He paused, choosing his words carefully. The Admiral said that the Navy's most valuable officers are those who have lived and worked in diverse international environments, who understand that American interests are best served when we can collaborate respectfully with people from different cultural backgrounds. He said that kind of global perspective can't be taught in classrooms. It has to be lived and experienced. I felt a spark of recognition. Admiral Patterson was a name I'd heard frequently in military circles, though I'd never met him personally. David spoke of him with the kind of respect that Navy officers reserved for truly exceptional leaders. "The point is," David continued, "Emma and Jake are developing exactly the kind of global competency and cultural intelligence that America needs in its future leaders. They're not being damaged by their experiences. They're being prepared for a world that requires international cooperation and cross-cultural understanding." As if summoned by our conversation, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for school and carrying a carefully prepared presentation folder. "Mom, can you help me practice my speech for the Richmond Elementary International Awareness Day? I'm representing Japan, and I want to make sure I pronounce all the Japanese words correctly."
The request was typical of Emma's approach to academic challenges. She didn't just complete assignments, she pursued excellence that reflected her genuine respect for the culture she'd experienced. Her presentation would include traditional Japanese music, origami demonstrations, and a discussion of cultural values that most elementary students never encountered. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, accepting the folder and reviewing her meticulously prepared materials. Emma had included photographs from our time in Okinawa, traditional recipes she'd learned from Japanese neighbors, and a comparative analysis of Japanese and American educational philosophies that demonstrated remarkable insight for an 8-year-old. Jake is doing his presentation on Korean martial arts philosophy. He's going to demonstrate some Taekwondo forms and explain how martial arts teach respect and discipline in Korean culture. I looked at the presentation materials and felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with my brother's narrow definition of success. Emma and Jake weren't just completing school assignments, they were serving as cultural ambassadors, sharing authentic experiences and perspectives that enriched their entire school community.
Mrs. Rodriguez said that Richmond Elementary has never had students who could provide such authentic international perspectives, Emma continued. She asked if we'd be willing to help develop a pen pal program with schools in different countries where military families are stationed. The irony was striking. While Marcus criticized our lifestyle as unstable and damaging, Emma and Jake's teachers consistently recognized them as remarkable resources who enhanced educational opportunities for everyone around them. Their experiences weren't limiting their potential. They were expanding possibilities for entire school communities. After David left for the Pentagon and the children departed for school, I spent the morning reflecting on the concrete evidence of our family's success within the military community. Our quarters at previous bases had always been gathering places for other military families, partly because Emma and Jake were such effective ambassadors for children who were struggling with relocations or cultural adjustments. In Okinawa, I had organized family support groups that helped newly arrived military spouses navigate the challenges of living in a foreign country. My success in that role had led to an invitation to serve on the base commander's Spouse Advisory Council, where I helped develop policies that improved family adjustment programs for all military personnel. In South Korea, I had managed cultural exchange programs that connected military families with local communities, creating educational opportunities that benefited both American service members and Korean civilians. The program had been so successful that it was expanded to other Pacific bases and became a model for international military diplomacy. In Norfolk, I had coordinated support services for military families dealing with deployment separations, managing resources that served over 300 families and significantly improved morale and retention rates. The base chaplain had specifically commended my work as essential to maintaining unit cohesion during extended overseas deployments. These weren't the part-time hobby activities that Marcus had dismissively characterized. They were substantial leadership responsibilities that required sophisticated organizational skills, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to manage complex projects with significant impact on military readiness and family welfare. More importantly, my work had consistently been recognized by military leadership as contributing to national security objectives. Strong military families are essential to maintaining an effective volunteer military force, and the programs I developed had measurable positive effects on recruitment, retention, and operational effectiveness. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Admiral Patterson's office at the Pentagon, which seemed like an impossible coincidence given David's morning conversation about international military cooperation. "Mrs. Henderson, this is Commander Mitchell calling from Admiral Patterson's office," the voice said formally. "The Admiral would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss your potential participation in a new Department of Defense initiative related to military family cultural competency programs." I felt my pulse quicken. Admiral Patterson was one of the Navy's most senior leaders, responsible for strategic planning that affected global military operations.
His invitation represented recognition at the highest levels of naval leadership. "Could you provide more details about the initiative?" I asked, trying to maintain professional composure despite my excitement. "The Admiral has been reviewing successful military family support programs throughout the Pacific Fleet, and your work in Okinawa and South Korea has been identified as exemplary. He's developing recommendations for expanding international cultural exchange programs, and he believes your experience would be valuable for strategic planning." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Commander Mitchell explaining that Admiral Patterson was specifically interested in my insights about how military families could serve as cultural ambassadors while maintaining strong American values and military discipline. The initiative would potentially affect policies for military families worldwide. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Marcus's criticism of my hobby leadership couldn't have been more wrong. My work supporting military families had apparently caught the attention of the Navy's senior leadership, who viewed it as strategically important for America's international military effectiveness. The timing felt providential. Just as I was questioning whether our family's choices were truly beneficial for Emma and Jake, I was receiving recognition that validated not just my own contributions, but the broader value of the international experiences that Marcus had characterized as harmful instability. What I didn't yet know was that Admiral Patterson's interest in our family extended far beyond my professional contributions to military family support programs. The meeting he was requesting would reveal connections that would completely reframe yesterday's argument with Marcus and provide a very different perspective on what it meant to be military brats in the Patterson family. That evening, as I prepared dinner in our temporary Richmond kitchen, my mind drifted back to the early years when Marcus and I had been allies rather than adversaries. The dynamics that led to yesterday's confrontation hadn't developed overnight. They were the product of 2 decades of gradually diverging life philosophies and an increasingly wide gap in how we defined success and family responsibility. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, Marcus and I were remarkably close for siblings separated by only 2 years. Our father, Robert Mitchell, worked as a civilian contractor for the Army Corps of Engineers, while my mother, Linda, taught elementary school at the local public school. We were solidly middle class with parents who emphasized education, hard work, and community service as the foundations of a meaningful life. Marcus had always been the more academically gifted of the two of us, graduating as valedictorian of Cedar Falls High School and earning a full scholarship to Northwestern University for undergraduate studies. I had been a strong student as well, but my interests leaned more towards international relations and cultural studies, subjects that our small Iowa community didn't particularly value or understand. During our high school years, Marcus had already begun developing the attitudes that would eventually drive us apart. He excelled in debate team, student government, and academic competitions that rewarded individual achievement and intellectual dominance. More concerning, he began to view success as a zero-sum competition where other people's achievements somehow diminished his own standing.
I remember the exact moment when I first recognized this troubling aspect of Marcus's personality. It was spring of my sophomore year, and I had just been selected for a summer cultural exchange program that would take me to Germany for 6 weeks. The program was highly competitive, requiring essays, interviews, and recommendations that demonstrated both academic excellence and cultural sensitivity. When I excitedly shared the news at our family dinner table, Marcus's initial response was congratulatory. "That's amazing, Sarah. Germany will be incredible." But within minutes, his tone had shifted to something more analytical and slightly condescending. Of course, those cultural exchange programs are really more about tourism than serious academic study. It's not like you'll be taking university-level courses or earning college credit. Our parents looked confused by Marcus's sudden criticism of an opportunity they had been celebrating just moments earlier. "Marcus," our mother said gently, "Sarah's been selected for a very prestigious program. She should be proud of this achievement." "Oh, I'm not criticizing Sarah," Marcus replied quickly, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm just pointing out that there's a difference between educational travel and serious academic accomplishment. When I do my summer research internship at the University of Iowa next year, I'll be contributing to actual scholarly research that might be published in academic journals. Even at 16, Marcus was already establishing the hierarchy that would define our relationship for the next 2 decades. His achievements were serious, academic, and valuable to society. Mine were interesting experiences that lacked the substance of real intellectual work. The 6 weeks I spent in Germany that summer were transformative in ways that Marcus could never have anticipated. Living with the Hoffman family in a small town outside Munich, I experienced firsthand the complexity of international relationships, the challenges of cross-cultural communication, and the profound satisfaction that comes from successfully adapting to unfamiliar social environments. More importantly, I discovered that I had a natural talent for cultural bridge building. Within 2 weeks, I was serving as an informal translator and cultural mediator for other American exchange students who were struggling with language barriers or social customs. By the end of my stay, the Hoffmans had invited me to return the following summer and had offered to help me apply for university programs in international studies. When I returned to Cedar Falls, bubbling with stories about my experiences and excited about potential college majors in international relations, Marcus's response was swift and dismissive. It sounds like you had a great vacation, Sarah, but now you need to focus on serious academic preparation for college. You can't build a career on travel experiences. Our parents, who had initially been excited about my international experiences, began to echo Marcus's concerns about practical career preparation. My father worried that international relations was an impractical major that wouldn't lead to stable employment. My mother suggested that I consider education or social work, fields where my people skills could be valuable, but which offered more predictable career paths. Marcus, meanwhile, was being celebrated for his academic achievements and his clear trajectory toward law school and eventual partnership in a prestigious firm. His summer research internship had indeed resulted in a published paper, and he was already being recruited by several top-tier universities for undergraduate programs that would position him for elite law schools. The contrast was striking and painful. Marcus's achievements were concrete, measurable, and universally respected by our community. My international experiences were viewed as interesting, but ultimately frivolous, valuable as personal enrichment, but irrelevant to serious career planning. This dynamic continued throughout our college years. Marcus attended Northwestern University, where he excelled in pre-law courses and served as president of the Debate Society. He spent his summers working at Chicago law firms, building the professional network that would eventually launch his legal career. I chose to attend American University in Washington, D.C., specifically because of their strong international studies program and their emphasis on practical international experience. My junior year abroad in South Korea was academically rigorous and professionally relevant, including internships with the U.S. Embassy and Korean cultural organizations that gave me real-world experience in diplomacy and cross-cultural communication. But when I returned home for holidays and family gatherings, Marcus consistently characterized my international experiences as extended vacations rather than serious academic work. Sarah's having amazing adventures, Sarah, though I'm not sure how all that travel translates into actual career skills. The comments stung because they reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what international experience actually involved. Living in foreign countries, navigating complex bureaucracies, managing language barriers, and building relationships across cultural divides required exactly the kind of adaptability, problem-solving skills, and emotional intelligence that would prove invaluable in any professional context. More damaging was Marcus's influence on our parents' perception of my choices. By the time I graduated from college, our father was openly worried that I had wasted 4 years on impractical studies that wouldn't lead to stable employment. My mother suggested that I consider returning to Cedar Falls and teaching elementary school, using my international experiences to make social studies classes more interesting for Iowa children. The suggestion wasn't malicious, but it reflected a complete misunderstanding of what I had learned and what I wanted to contribute to the world. I had developed expertise in international relations, cross-cultural communication, and global economic systems. I spoke 3 languages fluently and had practical experience working with international organizations on complex diplomatic challenges.
But in my family's eyes, I was still the daughter who liked to travel and was good with people, capabilities that were pleasant but not particularly valuable in the serious business of building a successful adult life. Everything changed when I met David Henderson at a Washington, D.C. networking event for young professionals interested in international service. David was a recent Naval Academy graduate, commissioned as an ensign, and preparing for his first overseas assignment. He was intelligent, principled, and shared my passion for serving something larger than personal advancement.
Our courtship was conducted across multiple time zones, as David completed training programs and I worked for a State Department contractor specializing in cultural liaison services for American diplomatic missions. When he proposed after 18 months of long-distance relationship management, I said yes immediately, knowing that marriage to a military officer would mean embracing the lifestyle of constant relocation and adaptation that I had been preparing for since that first summer in Germany. Marcus's reaction to our engagement was typically complex. He congratulated David and me warmly, expressing genuine happiness about our relationship. But he also began what would become a years-long campaign of subtle criticism about the practical challenges of military marriage and the career sacrifices that military spouses inevitably faced. David seems like a great guy, Marcus told me privately during our engagement party. But you realize that military wives basically give up their own career ambitions to support their husband's service, right? You'll be moving every 2 or 3 years, starting over professionally each time, never building the kind of sustained career momentum that leads to real success. I tried to explain that military life would actually allow me to use my international experience and cultural skills in ways that traditional careers never could. As a military spouse, I would live in diverse international communities, work with families from dozens of different cultural backgrounds, and have opportunities to contribute to diplomatic and cultural initiatives that served American interests around the world. But Marcus had already decided that military marriage represented a retreat from serious professional ambition. In his view, I was choosing romantic adventure over practical career development, prioritizing emotional satisfaction over financial security and professional achievement. Our wedding was beautiful, held at David's family church in Annapolis, with a reception that brought together military families, diplomatic colleagues, and Iowa relatives who had never seen such a diverse gathering of international professionals. Marcus served as an usher and gave a gracious toast that emphasized his happiness for our relationship while carefully avoiding any mention of our future plans or career goals. What I didn't understand at the time was that Marcus's criticism of military life was partly defensive. His own romantic relationships had been consistently unsuccessful, partly because his competitive nature and professional obsessions made it difficult for him to prioritize partnership over individual achievement. Watching me embrace a lifestyle that required constant compromise and mutual support challenged his assumptions about what mattered most in building a meaningful adult life. The birth of Emma and Jake 5 years later had intensified these dynamics. Marcus had remained unmarried, pouring all his energy into building his legal practice and accumulating the financial success that he believed validated his life choices. Meanwhile, David and I were raising twins while managing military assignments that took us to South Korea, Okinawa, and Norfolk. From Marcus's perspective, our family life looked chaotic and unstable. He saw the challenges: constant relocations, deployment separations, financial limitations of military pay, without understanding the profound satisfaction that came from serving something larger than ourselves while raising children who were developing remarkable capabilities for global citizenship. Yesterday's confrontation at the barbecue had been the culmination of 20 years of gradually diverging philosophies about success, family, and service. Marcus measured achievement through individual accomplishment and financial accumulation. I measured it through contribution to something larger than myself and the development of children who could navigate an increasingly interconnected world with confidence and cultural sensitivity.
What neither of us anticipated was that our fundamental disagreement about values was about to be resolved through the intervention of someone whose perspective on military service and family sacrifice would completely reframe our entire argument. The most devastating aspect of Marcus's criticism wasn't the individual comments, but the systematic way he had undermined my confidence over the years through carefully orchestrated family gatherings where my lifestyle choices were subtly but consistently portrayed as misguided decisions that were harming both my own potential and my children's future. The pattern had begun in earnest during our first Christmas back in Cedar Falls after Emma and Jake were born. David was deployed to the Persian Gulf, and I had made the difficult decision to travel to Iowa with 2 6-month-old infants, managing car seats, diaper bags, and the complex logistics of traveling alone with twins. The trip had been exhausting, but I was excited to introduce our children to their grandparents and show our extended family the joy that Emma and Jake brought to our lives. Marcus had arrived for Christmas dinner with Jennifer, the woman who would eventually become his wife, and immediately began what I now recognize as a carefully planned presentation designed to highlight the contrast between his stable lifestyle and my chaotic military family situation. Jennifer and I just closed on our new house in Richmond's West End, Marcus announced, as we gathered around our parents' dining room table. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, situated on 2 acres in one of Virginia's most prestigious neighborhoods. The schools are rated among the top 10 in the state, and we're already on the waiting list for the Groomtree Club. He paused, allowing our parents to absorb the implications of his financial success, before turning his attention to my situation with apparent concern. "How are you managing with David deployed, Sarah? It must be incredibly difficult trying to handle twins while living in military housing without any family support nearby."
Actually, the military community has incredible support systems for families during deployments, I replied, trying to maintain positivity despite feeling defensive. Our neighbors in Norfolk have been amazing, and the base has comprehensive childcare and family services that make deployment separations much more manageable than people realize. But Marcus was already shaking his head with that familiar expression of patient disagreement. "Community support is wonderful, Sarah, but it's not the same as having extended family nearby and building relationships that last for decades, rather than just until the next transfer." Jennifer, clearly coached for this conversation, added her own perspective. "I can't imagine how difficult it must be to constantly start over in new places. Marcus and I are already planning which elementary school our future children will attend, and we've identified the youth sports leagues and activity programs that will give them consistency throughout their childhood." The contrast was deliberate and devastating. While Marcus and Jennifer were making long-term plans that provided stability and community connections for their hypothetical future children, I was struggling with the immediate challenges of managing infant twins without my husband's support in a temporary living situation that would inevitably change within 2 years. Our mother, Linda, had been particularly affected by this comparison. "Sarah, honey, have you and David considered whether this lifestyle is really what's best for the babies? They need stability and routine, especially during their early developmental years." The suggestion that David and I hadn't carefully considered what was best for our children was painful, but what hurt more was seeing our parents begin to question decisions that I knew were right for our family. Marcus had managed to plant seeds of doubt that would influence family dynamics for years to come. This pattern continued relentlessly through subsequent family gatherings. When Emma and Jake were toddlers, Marcus would arrive with detailed stories about his law firm's latest victories and the prestigious clients who were contributing to his rapidly growing reputation. He would describe vacation homes, investment portfolios, and professional networks that demonstrated the rewards of choosing stability over adventure. Meanwhile, my family's circumstances would inevitably provide contrasts that highlighted the challenges of military life. David might be preparing for another deployment, or we might be facing an unexpected transfer that required me to resign from a job I had been enjoying, or the children might be struggling with yet another adjustment to new schools and social environments. I worry about the constant disruption in Emma and Jake's lives,
Our father, Robert, had confided in me during one particularly difficult visit when Jake was 3 and going through a challenging adjustment to our new assignment in South Korea. Children need consistency, Sarah. They need to know that their bedroom will be the same tomorrow as it is today. The criticism was especially painful because it came from someone who had raised me to value service and sacrifice for larger purposes. Our father had spent his career supporting military construction projects around the world, and he understood the importance of the work that David was doing. But Marcus's consistent messaging about stability and security had gradually undermined his confidence in our family's choices. The most insidious aspect of Marcus's campaign was how he framed his criticism as concern for Emma and Jake's well-being rather than judgment of my parenting decisions. At family gatherings, he would engage the children in conversations designed to highlight their awareness of military life's challenges while positioning their experiences as evidence of instability rather than resilience. "Emma, do you miss your friends when you have to move to new places?" Marcus would ask during family dinners, his tone gentle and caring. When Emma would acknowledge that saying goodbye to friends was difficult, Marcus would nod sympathetically and exchange meaningful glances with our parents that conveyed his concern about the emotional impact of constant relocations. "Jake, which school do you like best?" was another favorite question, designed to elicit responses that emphasized the confusion and inconsistency of attending multiple schools rather than the adaptability and broad perspective that such experiences provided. The children, innocent of the adult dynamics at play, would answer honestly about both the challenges and excitement of their lifestyle. But Marcus had a remarkable ability to amplify their mentions of difficulties while downplaying their enthusiasm about new experiences and cultural discoveries. During one particularly memorable Christmas gathering when the twins were 5, Emma had excitedly described the Japanese New Year celebration she had participated in during our assignment to Okinawa. She demonstrated origami techniques she had learned, sang traditional songs in Japanese, and explained cultural customs with the kind of sophisticated understanding that amazed most adults. But Marcus's response had focused entirely on one small detail in her enthusiastic presentation. "It sounds like you really enjoyed the Japanese celebrations, Emma. Do you ever feel confused about which holiday traditions come from America and which are from other countries?" The question was designed to suggest that Emma's exposure to multiple cultures was creating identity confusion rather than cultural enrichment. When Emma admitted that sometimes she wasn't sure which holiday traditions came from which countries, Marcus used her response as evidence that children raised in international environments might struggle with American identity and cultural belonging. Our parents, who had been delighted by Emma's presentation just moments earlier, suddenly looked concerned about whether their granddaughter was developing a proper understanding of American values and traditions. Marcus had managed to transform a demonstration of remarkable cultural competency into evidence of potential identity problems. These incidents accumulated over years, gradually eroding my confidence and our parents' support for our lifestyle choices. By the time Emma and Jake were in elementary school, family gatherings had become endurance tests, where I constantly felt the need to defend decisions that I knew were right for our family, but which seemed increasingly questionable when viewed through Marcus's lens of conventional success.
The psychological impact was cumulative and profound. Despite evidence that Emma and Jake were thriving academically, socially, and emotionally, I found myself second-guessing our choices whenever they faced normal childhood challenges. When Jake struggled with shyness during our first month in a new assignment, I wondered if Marcus was right about the damage caused by constant relocations. When Emma expressed homesickness for friends in our previous location, I questioned whether we were asking too much of our children. Marcus had succeeded in making me feel defensive about choices that should have filled me with pride. Our family was serving our country, experiencing diverse cultures, and raising children with remarkable global competency. But his consistent messaging about stability and security had convinced me that these achievements were somehow less valuable than the conventional suburban lifestyle he was providing for his own family. The breaking point had come 18 months ago, during Connor's birthday party at Marcus and Jennifer's new house in Richmond's most exclusive neighborhood. Their son had just turned 10, and the party was an elaborate affair featuring a hired entertainer, catered food, and children from Richmond's most affluent families. Emma and Jake, visiting during our temporary assignment to Norfolk, had approached the party with their characteristic openness and cultural sensitivity. They introduced themselves politely to children they didn't know, participated enthusiastically in organized activities, and demonstrated the kind of social grace that comes from years of adapting to new environments. But Marcus had interpreted their behavior differently. "I notice Emma and Jake are having trouble connecting with the other children," he had observed to Jennifer, within my hearing. "I think they're just not accustomed to normal American childhood experiences. They seem confused by the games and social dynamics that come naturally to children who've had stable childhoods." The comment was devastating because it was based on a fundamental misreading of what was actually happening. Emma and Jake weren't struggling to connect. They were successfully adapting to yet another new social environment, with the skills they had developed through years of similar challenges. Their initial observation period was a sophisticated social strategy, not evidence of social dysfunction. But Marcus's interpretation was accepted by other adults at the party, who began viewing my children through his lens of concern rather than recognizing their remarkable social competency. By the end of the afternoon, I felt like Emma and Jake had been judged as somehow deficient compared to children who had never faced the challenges of cultural adaptation. That evening, as I helped Emma and Jake process their experiences at the party, I realized that Marcus's criticism was affecting not just my confidence, but potentially my children's self-perception. They were beginning to sense that some adults viewed their lifestyle as problematic rather than enriching. "Mom," Emma had asked quietly as I tucked her to bed, "are we weird because we've lived in different countries? Connor's friend Madison said that normal kids don't move all the time." The question broke my heart because it reflected exactly the kind of self-doubt that Marcus's messaging was designed to create. Emma was questioning whether her remarkable experiences and capabilities somehow made her abnormal rather than exceptional. "Emma," I had replied, choosing my words carefully, "you and Jake have had experiences that most children never get to have. You've learned things about the world that make you special, not weird. Some people don't understand how amazing your experiences have been, but that doesn't make their opinions more important than the truth about who you are." But even as I reassured my daughter, I realized that Marcus's systematic campaign of subtle criticism had been more effective than I had wanted to admit. After years of defending our choices against his carefully constructed arguments, I was beginning to internalize doubts about decisions that I knew were right for our family. What I couldn't have anticipated was that the very next day would bring a revelation that would completely reframe not just my understanding of our family's value, but Marcus's comprehension of exactly what it meant to be connected to the military community that he had spent years systematically disparaging. The morning after Connor's birthday party, as I sat in our Norfolk quarters watching Emma and Jake eat breakfast with the quiet dignity that military children develop when they're processing complex social situations, I made a decision that would fundamentally change how I approached both my family relationships and my own professional development. Marcus's years-long campaign of subtle undermining had been effective because I had been responding defensively rather than strategically. Instead of simply defending our choices, I needed to demonstrate through concrete achievements that military life wasn't just different from civilian success, it was superior in ways that Marcus couldn't ignore or dismiss. "Mom," Jake said, interrupting my thoughts, "yesterday at the party, some kids asked me why we move so much. I tried to explain about Dad's job and serving the country, but they looked at me like I was making excuses for something bad." His observation crystallized exactly what I needed to address. Emma and Jake were beginning to internalize other people's misconceptions about military life instead of understanding the extraordinary nature of their experiences. More importantly, they were starting to see their father's service as something that required justification, rather than something that deserved respect and admiration. "Jake," I said, setting down my coffee cup and giving him my full attention, Tomorrow, I want you and Emma to help me create a presentation about all the places we've lived and all the things you've learned. We're going to show people exactly what makes military families special. Over the following weeks, I embarked on what I privately called Project Validation, a systematic effort to document, quantify, and showcase the remarkable achievements that Emma, Jake, and I had accumulated through our military lifestyle. If Marcus wanted to compete on the basis of measurable success, I would give him metrics that demonstrated the value of our choices.
I started by contacting Emma and Jake's teachers at their Norfolk elementary school to request formal assessments of their academic performance, social development, and cultural competency. The results were more impressive than I had dared to hope. Emma's third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patricia Wakefield, provided a written evaluation that read like a catalog of exceptional capabilities. Emma demonstrates reading comprehension skills at a 7th grade level, mathematical reasoning abilities that exceed grade-level expectations by at least 2 years, and cultural awareness that is remarkable in a child of any age, Mrs. Wakefield wrote. Her ability to serve as a peer mediator for students from diverse backgrounds suggests leadership potential that should be nurtured through gifted and talented programs. Jake's assessment was equally impressive. His teacher, Mr. Robert Chen, noted that Jake's problem-solving approaches reflected exposure to multiple educational philosophies and learning styles. Jake demonstrates the kind of adaptive thinking that educational researchers associate with children who have been exposed to diverse cultural and academic environments, Mr. Chen wrote. His ability to help other students adjust to new situations suggests emotional intelligence that is highly unusual in elementary-aged children. But beyond academic assessments, I began documenting the practical skills that Emma and Jake had developed through their international experiences. They could navigate airport security procedures independently, pack efficiently for any climate, communicate basic needs in 3 languages, and adapt to new social environments with remarkable speed and confidence. More importantly, they had developed what psychologists call cultural intelligence, the ability to function effectively in culturally diverse settings and to serve as bridges between people from different backgrounds. These weren't just interesting personal qualities, they were professional capabilities that corporations and government agencies spent millions of dollars trying to develop in their adult employees. I researched the market value of international experience and cross-cultural competency in various professional fields. What I discovered was that the skills Emma and Jake were developing were exactly what employers in international business, diplomacy, intelligence services, and multinational corporations were actively seeking. Their childhood experiences were providing them with competitive advantages that money couldn't buy and that traditional education rarely delivered. Armed with this research, I began reaching out to my own professional network to explore opportunities that would allow me to demonstrate the strategic value of my military family experience. The call from Admiral Patterson's office had been perfectly timed. I was ready to pursue opportunities that would showcase military family expertise at the highest levels of government service. But I also realized that I needed to establish my own professional credentials independent of David's military career. Marcus's criticism had been effective partly because he could characterize my work as volunteer activities rather than serious professional contributions. If I wanted to command respect in civilian circles, I needed achievements that could be measured by civilian standards of success. I began applying for positions with international consulting firms, nonprofit organizations focused on global development, and government contractors specializing in cross-cultural training and international program management. My applications emphasized not just my educational background in international relations, but the practical experience I had gained through years of managing complex cultural adaptation challenges for military families. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, I had received interview requests from 6 different organizations, all of which were specifically interested in my unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical cultural adaptation experience. During my interview with Meridian's Global Solutions senior partner, Dr. Victoria Rashid, I was asked to provide specific examples of how my military family experience had prepared me for international consulting work. Instead of apologizing for the unconventional nature of my background, I was able to present concrete case studies of complex cultural challenges I had successfully navigated. "Mrs. Henderson," Dr. Rashid said near the end of our 2-hour interview, "I've been working in international consulting for 15 years, and I've never encountered someone with your combination of theoretical knowledge and practical cultural adaptation experience. Most of our consultants have either academic expertise or business experience, but very few have actually lived the challenges that we help our clients navigate." She paused, reviewing my application materials one more time. "I'm particularly impressed with your work organizing cultural exchange programs for military families. The success metrics you've achieved, 98% satisfaction rates, measurable improvements in cross-cultural adjustment, and positive feedback from both American families and host country communities, demonstrates exactly the kind of systematic thinking and practical implementation skills that our clients need." When Meridian offered me a position as Senior Cultural Competency Consultant with a starting salary of $95,000 plus benefits and international travel opportunities, I felt a profound sense of validation that had nothing to do with competing with Marcus and everything to do with finally receiving professional recognition for capabilities I had been developing for over a decade. More importantly, the position would allow me to work remotely and travel internationally, making it compatible with David's military assignments while advancing my own career at a pace that would quickly surpass anything I could have achieved through traditional civilian career paths. But I wasn't finished with project validation. I also began documenting David's professional achievements and advancement trajectory within the Navy, presenting a very different picture of military career development than the one Marcus had been painting for our family. David's service record included commendations for exceptional performance in international maritime operations, leadership roles in joint military exercises with allied nations, and specialized training in strategic planning and international security analysis. His promotion to lieutenant commander had come ahead of schedule, and his fitness reports consistently rated him in the top 10% of officers at his rank level.
More significantly, David's international experience and cultural competency had positioned him for assignments that were becoming increasingly important in modern military strategy. His current role at the Pentagon involved coordinating with allied naval forces from 12 different countries, work that required exactly the kind of cross-cultural communication skills that our family lifestyle had been developing. When I researched civilian equivalent positions for David's military expertise, I discovered that his combination of technical knowledge, leadership experience, and international competency would translate into executive-level positions with defense contractors, international consulting firms, or government agencies with starting salaries that would significantly exceed Marcus's current income. The revelation was both satisfying and sobering. For years, Marcus had been comparing David's military salary to his own civilian income without understanding that military compensation included benefits, housing allowances, and professional development opportunities that had substantial economic value. More importantly, he had completely misunderstood the civilian market value of David's military experience and international expertise. But the most important aspect of project validation was helping Emma and Jake understand the exceptional nature of their own experiences and capabilities. I began working with them to create a comprehensive portfolio that documented their international experiences, cultural competencies, and academic achievements. Emma's portfolio included photographs and cultural artifacts from each country where we had lived, essays she had written about international experiences, certificates from language programs, and recommendations from teachers who had been impressed by her global awareness and leadership capabilities. By age 8, she had accumulated evidence of international experience and cultural competency that most adults never achieve. Jake's portfolio focused more on his athletic achievements and martial arts training from different countries,
His collection of international friends and pen pal relationships, and his remarkable ability to adapt to new academic and social environments. His documentation demonstrated the kind of resilience and flexibility that child development experts associate with highly successful adult outcomes. Working on these portfolios with Emma and Jake served a dual purpose. It helped them understand that their experiences were assets rather than obstacles, and it provided concrete evidence that I could present to family members who had been influenced by Marcus's narrative about military family instability. The transformation in Emma and Jake's self-perception was immediate and remarkable. Instead of feeling defensive about their lifestyle, they began talking with pride about their international experiences and cultural competencies. They stopped seeing themselves as different in problematic ways and started understanding that they were different in exceptional ways. "Mom," Emma said one evening as we worked on organizing her cultural artifact collection, "I think Uncle Marcus doesn't understand what we've learned from living in different places. Maybe if we showed him our portfolios, he would see that military families aren't weird or unstable." Her comment revealed both the generosity of spirit that military children develop and the sophisticated understanding she was gaining about adult perspectives and family dynamics. Emma was beginning to recognize that Marcus's criticism might reflect his own limitations rather than problems with our family's choices. The final component of project validation involved preparing for what I knew would be an inevitable confrontation with Marcus about our family's choices and our children's future. Armed with professional achievements, documented evidence of the children's exceptional development, and clear understanding of the market value of our international experience, I was ready to engage Marcus on his own terms, while demonstrating the superiority of our approach to family development and career building. What I couldn't have anticipated was that the confrontation would come sooner than expected, and that it would be resolved not through my careful documentation of our achievements, but through the revelation of family connections that would completely reframe Marcus's understanding of what it meant to be military brats in our particular family. The morning after Connor's birthday party, as I sat in our Norfolk quarters, watching Emma and Jake eat breakfast with the quiet dignity that military children develop when they're processing complex social situations, I made a decision that would fundamentally change how I approached both my family relationships and my own professional development. Marcus's years-long campaign of subtle undermining had been effective because I had been responding defensively rather than strategically. Instead of simply defending our choices, I needed to demonstrate through concrete achievements that military life wasn't just different from civilian success, it was superior in ways that Marcus couldn't ignore or dismiss. "Mom," Jake said, interrupting my thoughts, "yesterday at the party, some kids asked me why we move so much. I tried to explain about Dad's job and serving the country, but they looked at me like I was making excuses for something bad." His observation crystallized exactly what I needed to address. Jake and Emma were beginning to internalize other people's misconceptions about military life, instead of understanding the extraordinary nature of their experiences. More importantly, they were starting to see their father's service as something that required justification, rather than something that deserved respect and admiration. "Jake," I said, setting down my coffee cup and giving him my full attention, "tomorrow I want you and Emma to help me create a presentation about all the places we've lived and all the things you've learned. We're going to show people exactly what makes military families special." Over the following weeks, I embarked on what I privately called Project Validation, a systematic effort to document, quantify, and showcase the remarkable achievements that Emma, Jake, and I had accumulated through our military lifestyle. If Marcus wanted to compete on the basis of measurable success, I would give him metrics that demonstrated the value of our choices.
I started by contacting Emma and Jake's teachers at their Norfolk elementary school to request formal assessments of their academic performance, social development, and cultural competency. The results were more impressive than I had dared to hope for.
Emma's third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patricia Wakefield, provided a written evaluation that read like a catalog of exceptional capabilities. Emma demonstrates reading comprehension skills at a 7th grade level, mathematical reasoning abilities that exceed grade-level expectations by at least 2 years, and cultural awareness that is remarkable in a child of any age, Mrs. Wakefield wrote. Her ability to serve as a peer mediator for students from diverse backgrounds suggests leadership potential that should be nurtured through gifted and talented programs. Jake's assessment was equally impressive. His teacher, Mr. Robert Chen, noted that Jake's problem-solving approaches reflected exposure to multiple educational philosophies and learning styles. Jake demonstrates the kind of adaptive thinking that educational researchers associate with children who have been exposed to diverse cultural and academic environments, Mr. Chen wrote. His ability to help other students adjust to new situations suggests emotional intelligence that is highly unusual in elementary-age children. But beyond academic assessments, I began documenting the practical skills that Emma and Jake had developed through their international experiences. They could navigate airport security procedures independently, pack efficiently for any climate, communicate basic needs in 3 languages, and adapt to new social environments with remarkable speed and confidence. More importantly, they had developed what psychologists call cultural intelligence, the ability to function effectively in culturally diverse settings and to serve as bridges between people from different backgrounds. These weren't just interesting personal qualities. They were professional capabilities that corporations and government agencies spent millions of dollars trying to develop in their adult employees. I researched the market value of international experience and cross-cultural competency in various professional fields. What I discovered was that the skills Emma and Jake were developing were exactly what employers in international business, diplomacy, intelligence services, and multinational corporations were actively seeking. Their childhood experiences were providing them with competitive advantages that money couldn't buy and that traditional education rarely delivered. Armed with this research, I began reaching out to my own professional network to explore opportunities that would allow me to demonstrate the strategic value of my military family experience. The call from Admiral Patterson's office had been perfectly timed. I was ready to pursue opportunities that would showcase military family expertise at the highest levels of government service. But I also realized that I needed to establish my own professional credentials independent of David's military career. Marcus's criticism had been effective partly because he could characterize my work as volunteer activities rather than serious professional contributions. If I wanted to command respect in civilian circles, I needed achievements that could be measured by civilian standards of success. I began applying for positions with international consulting firms, nonprofit organizations focused on global development, and government contractors specializing in cross-cultural training and international program management. My applications emphasized not just my educational background in international relations, but the practical experience I had gained through years of managing complex cultural adaptation challenges for military families. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, I had received interview requests from 6 different organizations, all of which were specifically interested in my unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical international adaptation experience. The position that most excited me was with Meridian Global Solutions, a Washington-based consulting firm that provided cultural competency training and international program management services to Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. During my interview with Meridian's senior partner, Dr. Victoria Rashid, I was asked to provide specific examples of how my military family experience had prepared me for international consulting work. Instead of apologizing for the unconventional nature of my background, I was able to present concrete case studies of complex cultural challenges I had successfully navigated. Mrs. Henderson, Dr. Rashid said near the end of our 2-hour interview, I've been working in international consulting for 15 years, and I've never encountered someone with your combination of theoretical knowledge and practical cultural adaptation experience. Most of our consultants have either academic expertise or business experience, but very few have actually lived the challenges that we help our clients navigate. She paused, reviewing my application materials one more time. I'm particularly impressed by your work organizing cultural exchange programs for military families. The success metrics you've achieved, 98% satisfaction rates, measurable improvements in cross-cultural adjustment, and positive feedback from both American families and host country communities demonstrate exactly the kind of systematic thinking and practical implementation skills that our clients need. When Meridian offered me a position as Senior Cultural Competency Consultant with a starting salary of $95,000 plus benefits and international travel opportunities, I felt a profound sense of validation that had nothing to do with competing with Marcus and everything to do with finally receiving professional recognition for capabilities I had been developing for over a decade. More importantly, the position would allow me to work remotely and travel internationally, making it compatible with David's military assignments while advancing my own career at a pace that would quickly surpass anything I could have achieved through traditional civilian career paths. But I wasn't finished with project validation. I also began documenting David's professional achievements and advancement trajectory within the Navy, presenting a very different picture of military career development than the one Marcus had been painting for our family. David's service record included commendations for exceptional performance in international maritime operations, leadership roles in joint military exercises with allied nations, and specialized training in strategic planning and international security analysis. His promotion to lieutenant commander had come ahead of schedule, and his fitness reports consistently rated him in the top 10% of officers at his rank level. More significantly, David's international experience and cultural competency had positioned him for assignments that were becoming increasingly important in modern military strategy. His current role at the Pentagon involved coordinating with allied naval forces from 12 different countries, work that required exactly the kind of cross-cultural communication skills that our family lifestyle had been developing.
When I researched civilian equivalent positions for David's military expertise, I discovered that his combination of technical knowledge, leadership experience, and international competency would translate into executive-level positions with defense contractors, international consulting firms, or government agencies, with starting salaries that would significantly exceed Marcus's current income. The revelation was both satisfying and sobering. For years, Marcus had been comparing David's military salary to his own civilian income without understanding that military compensation included benefits, housing allowances, and professional development opportunities that had substantial economic value. More importantly, he had completely misunderstood the civilian market value of David's military experience and international expertise. But the most important aspect of project validation was helping Emma and Jake understand the exceptional nature of their own experiences and capabilities. I began working with them to create a comprehensive portfolio that documented their international experiences, cultural competencies, and academic achievements. Emma's portfolio included photographs and cultural artifacts from each country where we had lived, essays she had written about international experiences, certificates from language programs, and recommendations from teachers who had been impressed by her global awareness and leadership capabilities. By age 8, she had accumulated evidence of international experience and cultural competency that most adults never achieve. Jake's portfolio focused more on his athletic achievements and martial arts training from different countries, his collection of international friends and pen pal relationships, and his remarkable ability to adapt to new academic and social environments. His documentation demonstrated the kind of resilience and flexibility that child development experts associate with highly successful adult outcomes.
Working on these portfolios with Emma and Jake served a dual purpose. It helped them understand that their experiences were assets rather than obstacles, and it provided concrete evidence that I could present to family members who had been influenced by Marcus's narrative about military family instability. The transformation in Emma and Jake's self-perception was immediate and remarkable. Instead of feeling defensive about their lifestyle, they began talking with pride about their international experiences and cultural competencies. They stopped seeing themselves as different in problematic ways and started understanding that they were different in exceptional ways. "Mom," Emma said one evening as we worked on organizing her cultural artifact collection, "I think Uncle Marcus doesn't understand what we've learned from living in different places. Maybe if we showed him our portfolios, he would see that military families aren't weird or unstable." Her comment revealed both the generosity of spirit that military children develop and the sophisticated understanding she was gaining about adult perspectives and family dynamics. Emma was beginning to recognize that Marcus's criticism might reflect his own limitations rather than problems with our family's choices. The final component of project validation involved preparing for what I knew would be an inevitable confrontation with Marcus about our family's choices and our children's future. Armed with professional achievements, documented evidence of the children's exceptional development, and clear understanding of the market value of our international experience, I was ready to engage Marcus on his own terms, while demonstrating the superiority of our approach to family development and career building. What I couldn't have anticipated was that the confrontation would come sooner than expected, and that it would be resolved not through my careful documentation of our achievements, but through the revelation of family connections that would completely reframe Marcus's understanding about what it meant to be military brats in our particular family. 3 days after my job offer for Meridian Global Solutions, I found myself sitting in Admiral Patterson's Pentagon office, surrounded by the kind of military memorabilia and international diplomatic gifts that told the story of a career spent at the highest levels of naval leadership and global security strategy. What I had expected to be a routine consultation about military family cultural programs had evolved into something far more significant and personally relevant. "Mrs. Henderson," Admiral Patterson began, settling behind his mahogany desk with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security interests, "your work with military family cultural adaptation programs has caught the attention of several senior officials in the Department of Defense. We're particularly interested in your insights about how military families can serve as cultural ambassadors while maintaining strong American values and military discipline." The Admiral was exactly what I had expected from David's descriptions. Silver-haired, impeccably uniformed, and with the kind of commanding presence that comes from decades of leadership in complex international situations. What I hadn't expected was the personal warmth in his manner and the genuine interest he showed in understanding the practical challenges that military families faced during overseas assignments. "Admiral, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to strategic planning," I replied, trying to maintain professional composure, despite my excitement about the scope of what he was describing. "The programs I have developed have consistently shown that military families can be tremendous assets for building positive relationships with host country communities when they're given proper cultural preparation and ongoing support." Admiral Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of systematic thinking we need for the initiative I'm developing. The Navy is preparing to expand our international partnerships significantly over the next 5 years, and we need families who can represent American values effectively while building genuine respect for the cultures where they're stationed." He pulled out a thick folder marked Classified and began explaining the scope of the cultural diplomacy initiative that would potentially affect military families worldwide. The program would establish new standards for pre-deployment cultural training, create ongoing support systems for families in overseas assignments, and develop assessment metrics for measuring the effectiveness of military family cultural engagement. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm authorized to offer you a position as Director of Military Family Cultural Competency, reporting directly to my office with responsibility for implementing these programs across all naval installations worldwide. The position would carry GS-14 federal pay grade, full security clearance, and the opportunity to shape policies that affect thousands of military families."
The offer was more significant than anything I had imagined possible. GS-14 federal pay grade meant a salary of over $120,000, substantially higher than Marcus's income, and far beyond anything I could have achieved through traditional civilian career paths. More importantly, the position would establish me as a recognized expert in military family cultural competency at the highest levels of government service. But as Admiral Patterson continued explaining the responsibilities and scope of the position, I began to sense that there was something more personal about his interest in our family's experiences than professional consideration alone would justify. "Admiral," I said carefully, "may I ask how you became aware of my work with military family programs? My understanding is that most of my contributions have been at the base level, rather than in contexts that would typically come to Pentagon attention." Admiral Patterson's expression shifted slightly, and I detected something that looked almost like amusement. "Mrs. Henderson, your work has been exceptional, but you're right that base-level programs don't usually reach my desk through normal channels." He paused, as if weighing how much to reveal about his sources of information. "The truth is, I've been following your family's activities for several years through reports from various base commanders who've been particularly impressed by your contributions to military family morale and cultural adaptation success rates. Your programs in Okinawa achieved retention and satisfaction metrics that were unprecedented for families in that assignment." Something in his tone suggested that his interest was more than professional, and I found myself wondering whether there might be personal connections that I wasn't aware of. Military communities are surprisingly small, and senior officers often maintain informal networks that track promising personnel and their families across multiple assignments. "Admiral, may I ask whether you have some personal familiarity with our family beyond my professional work?" I asked directly, sensing that there might be information that would help me understand the unusual nature of this opportunity. Admiral Patterson smiled, and for the first time since our meeting began, his demeanor shifted from formal military courtesy to something warmer and more personal. "Mrs. Henderson, I think it's time I told you something that your husband may not have mentioned, and that your children certainly don't understand yet." He stood and walked to a credenza behind his desk, retrieving a silver-framed photograph that he handed to me with obvious pride. The image showed a much younger Admiral Patterson in dress whites, standing beside a beautiful woman in an elegant wedding gown, both of them beaming with happiness. "That's my wedding day, 42 years ago. I married Margaret Ellen Patterson, who was then Margaret Ellen Morrison. Margaret and I had 2 children, a son who became a career diplomat and is currently serving as deputy ambassador to South Korea, and a daughter who chose a very different path." My heart began racing as I processed the implications of what he was telling me. The photograph, the timeline, the mention of a daughter who had chosen a different path, all of it pointed towards a connection that would completely reframe everything I thought I knew about our family's place in the military community. "Our daughter," Admiral Patterson continued, "was always fascinated by international cultures and global perspectives. She studied international relations, spent time in Europe during college, and eventually married a young Navy officer who shared her passion for service and international experience." He paused, allowing me to absorb what he was revealing. "Mrs. Henderson, Margaret Ellen Patterson was your mother-in-law. Emma and Jake are my grandchildren, and you are the daughter-in-law I've been hearing about for years through David's letters and through reports from commanding officers who've been consistently impressed by your contributions to military family community life." The revelation hit me like a physical shock. David's father, who had died in a car accident when David was 16, had been Admiral Patterson's son-in-law. David's mother, Margaret, who had married and moved to California after her husband's death, was Admiral Patterson's daughter. Emma and Jake were the grandchildren of one of the Navy's most senior and respected leaders. "David never told me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I knew his mother had remarried and that his stepfather was military, but I never realized the connection." Admiral Patterson nodded understandingly.
Margaret asked David not to mention the family connection when he was coming up through the ranks. She was concerned that having an admiral for a grandfather might create unfair advantages or expectations that could affect his career development. David has earned every promotion and assignment through his own merit without any influence from family connections. The pieces of a complex puzzle were suddenly falling into place. David's exceptional fitness reports, his ahead-of-schedule promotions, his assignments to increasingly responsible positions, all of it had been achieved without any awareness on my part that he was the grandson of a flag officer whose reputation and influence extended throughout the Navy and into the highest levels of government service. Mrs. Henderson, Admiral Patterson continued, I've been following your family's progress not just because of professional interest in military family programs, but because you're raising my grandchildren, and I'm extremely proud of what you and David have accomplished together. He returned to his desk and pulled out another folder, this one containing what appeared to be letters and photographs. Emma and Jake don't know our family connection yet, but I've been saving everything. Their school reports, photographs from your various assignments, stories that David shares about their cultural experiences and academic achievements. I have a complete record of their remarkable development as global citizens and military children. The implications were staggering. Emma and Jake weren't just military brats who happened to be thriving despite constant relocations. They were the grandchildren of a Navy Admiral who had been proudly following their progress and who possessed the influence to ensure that their unique experiences would be recognized and valued at the highest levels of government service.
Admiral, I said, still processing the magnitude of this revelation. Does this mean that David's military career has been entirely his own achievement? Admiral Patterson interrupted firmly. David doesn't know that I've been keeping track of his progress, and his commanding officers certainly don't know about our family relationship. His exceptional performance evaluations and advancement opportunities have been earned through merit alone. He opened the folder and showed me copies of David's fitness reports, commendation letters, and promotion recommendations, all of which praised his international expertise, cultural competency, and leadership potential without any reference to family connections. However, Admiral Patterson continued, now that David has established himself as an exceptional officer through his own accomplishments, and now that you've demonstrated remarkable expertise in military family cultural programs, I think it's time for our family connection to become an asset rather than a secret. The transformation in my understanding was complete and overwhelming. The position Admiral Patterson was offering wasn't just professional recognition of my work. It was an opportunity to serve at the highest levels of government while working with my children's grandfather to shape policies that would affect military families worldwide. More immediately relevant to my situation with Marcus, Emma and Jake weren't just resilient military children who had adapted well to international experiences. They were the grandchildren of a Navy admiral whose career had taken him to the pinnacle of military leadership and whose influence extended throughout the defense establishment and into international diplomatic circles. Admiral, I said, beginning to comprehend the full implications of this revelation. My brother has been very critical of our family's lifestyle choices and our children's experiences as military dependents. He's expressed concern that constant relocations and international assignments are damaging to Emma and Jake's development and future prospects. Admiral Patterson's expression hardened slightly, taking on the stern authority that comes with flag rank and decades of command responsibility. Mrs. Henderson, Emma and Jake are developing exactly the kind of global competency and cultural intelligence that America needs in its future leaders. Their experiences aren't limiting their potential. They're expanding possibilities that most children never have access to. He stood and walked to his office window, gazing out at the Pentagon's bustling corridors where military personnel from all branches of service worked on challenges that affected global security and international cooperation. Perhaps, he said thoughtfully, it's time for your brother to understand
exactly what kind of family Emma and Jake belong to, and exactly what their grandfather thinks about the value of military service and international experience. As our meeting concluded and I prepared to leave the Pentagon with Admiral Patterson's job offer and the stunning revelation about our family connections, I realized that tomorrow's planned visit to Emma and Jake's school would be far more significant than I had imagined. The distinguished gentleman who would be picking up my children wouldn't just be demonstrating the importance of military-family relationships, he would be revealing to Marcus that the military brats he had been criticizing were the beloved grandchildren of one of America's most respected naval leaders. The morning of Admiral Patterson's visit to Richmond Elementary, I found myself standing in the principal's office with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that I hadn't experienced since my college graduation. What had been planned as a simple grandfather's visit to meet his grandchildren's teachers had evolved into something far more significant, a moment that would permanently alter my family's dynamics and my brother's understanding of military service. Principal Rebecca Martinez had been both excited and slightly overwhelmed when I informed her that a Navy Admiral would be visiting the school to meet with Emma and Jake's teachers and observe their presentations for International Awareness Day. Richmond Elementary had never hosted such a distinguished military visitor, and Principal Martinez had spent the morning ensuring that everything reflected the school's commitment to academic excellence and cultural diversity. "Mrs. Henderson," Principal Martinez said, checking her watch nervously, "I want to make sure we handle this visit appropriately. Should we prepare any special protocols for receiving Admiral Patterson?" I smiled, remembering my own shock at discovering our family connection just days earlier. "Principal Martinez, Admiral Patterson is first and foremost a grandfather who's excited to see his grandchildren's academic achievements. He'll appreciate being treated with respect, but he's more interested in understanding Emma and Jake's educational experience than in military ceremony." At exactly 10:30 a.m., a black sedan with Navy license plates pulled into the school's circular driveway. Admiral Patterson emerged wearing his dress blue uniform, every ribbon and decoration precisely placed, his bearing commanding immediate attention from students and faculty who happened to be in the hallway. The sight of a flag officer in full dress uniform was impressive enough to stop conversations and create an atmosphere of respectful attention throughout the school. But what I noticed most was how Admiral Patterson's demeanor transformed the moment he entered the building. The stern authority of high military command softened into the warm anticipation of a grandfather eager to learn about his grandchildren's world. He greeted Principal Martinez with gracious courtesy, thanked the teachers for their dedication to Emma and Jake's education, and expressed genuine interest in understanding the school's approach to international cultural awareness. "Principal Martinez," Admiral Patterson said as we walked toward Emma's classroom, "I understand that Emma and Jake have been contributing to your International Awareness Day program. I'd be very interested in seeing how Richmond Elementary incorporates global perspectives into elementary education." What followed was a demonstration of exactly why Emma and Jake had thrived in every educational environment they had encountered. Emma's presentation on Japanese culture was sophisticated, respectful, and engaging, incorporating authentic cultural artifacts, language demonstrations, and thoughtful analysis of cultural values that impressed not just Admiral Patterson, but every adult in the room.
Jake's martial arts demonstration combined physical skill with cultural education, explaining the philosophical foundations of Korean Taekwondo and demonstrating techniques with precision and discipline that reflected years of training in multiple international settings. His ability to articulate the connection between martial arts practice and character development showed remarkable maturity and cultural understanding. "Emma, Jake," Admiral Patterson said after their presentations concluded, "I'm extraordinarily proud of what you've learned and how you've shared your experiences with your classmates. You're representing the best traditions of American military families who serve around the world." It was at that moment that Marcus arrived.
I had mentioned to Marcus that the children would be receiving a special visitor related to their international experiences, expecting that he might drop by during his lunch break to observe what he probably assumed would be a routine cultural presentation. What Marcus encountered instead was a scene that completely contradicted every assumption he had made about military families and our place in American society. Marcus entered Emma's classroom to find a Navy Admiral in full dress uniform listening intently to his niece explain the philosophical differences between American and Japanese approaches to education. The sight stopped him mid-step, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to confused recognition that something far more significant was happening than he had anticipated. "Marcus," I said, approaching him with carefully controlled satisfaction, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Patterson. Admiral, this is my brother Marcus Mitchell." Admiral Patterson turned with the measured authority that comes with flag rank and extended his hand to Marcus with polite but unmistakable command presence. "Mr. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a great deal about Emma and Jake's extended family." Marcus shook the Admiral's hand with obvious confusion, clearly trying to process why a Navy Admiral was visiting his niece and nephew's elementary school and speaking about them with such familiar pride. "Admiral Patterson," Marcus managed to say, "are you here in some official capacity related to the school's cultural program?" Admiral Patterson smiled with the kind of diplomatic grace that comes from decades of managing complex international relationships. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm here as a grandfather visiting his grandchildren's school to see their academic achievements and meet their teachers." The words hung in the air like a depth charge, and I watched Marcus's expression change as he processed the implications of what Admiral Patterson had just revealed. Emma and Jake, the military brats he had spent years characterizing as rootless and unstable, were the grandchildren of a Navy admiral whose uniform displayed ribbons representing service at the highest levels of American military leadership. "Grandfather?" Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Admiral Patterson is David's grandfather," I explained, keeping my tone neutral despite the profound satisfaction of this moment. "Emma and Jake are his grandchildren, though we've only recently been able to acknowledge the family connection publicly." I could see Marcus's mind racing to recalculate everything he thought he knew about our family's place in American society. The modest military salary he had criticized was supplemented with benefits and opportunities that most civilians never accessed. The rootless wandering he had disparaged was actually strategic international experience supervised by one of the Navy's most senior military leaders. The military brats he had pitied were being raised with advantages that money couldn't buy and connections that extended to the highest levels of government service. "Mr. Mitchell," Admiral Patterson said, his tone shifting to something more formal and authoritative, "I understand you have concerns about Emma and Jake's upbringing and educational experiences." Marcus looked trapped between his years of confident criticism and the sudden realization that he had been questioning the judgment of a flag officer whose career represented the pinnacle of military achievement. "Admiral, I've always supported military service. My concerns have been about the effects of constant relocation on children's stability and development." Admiral Patterson nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Marcus's perspective with the diplomatic patience he had developed through decades of international negotiations. "Mr. Mitchell, Emma and Jake are developing exactly the kind of global competency and cultural intelligence that America needs in its future leaders. Their experiences aren't limiting their potential, they're expanding possibilities that most children never have access to." He gestured toward Emma and Jake, who were quietly organizing their presentation materials with the efficient teamwork that military children develop through years of shared experiences. "These children can navigate international airports independently, communicate across language barriers, adapt to new social environments with remarkable speed, and serve as cultural ambassadors for American values wherever they go. Those aren't limitations, Mr. Mitchell. Those are extraordinary capabilities." Marcus appeared to be struggling how to respond to criticism from someone whose authority and expertise so completely overshadowed his own successful but ultimately provincial legal career. "Admiral, I appreciate your perspective.
I suppose I've been viewing their experiences through the lens of traditional civilian childhood expectations.
Traditional expectations, Admiral Patterson replied, his tone carrying the weight of command authority, are designed for traditional circumstances. Emma and Jake are being prepared for a world that requires international cooperation, cross-cultural understanding, and the ability to represent American interests in diverse global settings. Their childhood experiences are providing them with competitive advantages that most adults never develop. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Admiral Patterson systematically dismantling every criticism that Marcus had raised about military family life over the years. But what struck me most was not the Admiral's defense of our lifestyle choices, but Marcus's obvious recognition that he had been profoundly wrong about the value and status of military families. As the school visit concluded and we prepared to leave Richmond Elementary, Admiral Patterson made one final observation that would reshape our family dynamics permanently. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "I hope you'll join us for dinner this weekend. I'd like to discuss with you some of the opportunities that Emma and Jake will have access to as they continue their education. The Naval Academy, international scholarship programs, diplomatic service opportunities. Their military family background opens doors that most children never even know exist." The invitation was both gracious and strategic, offering Marcus the opportunity to understand the full scope of advantages that came with military family connections, while making it clear that those advantages extended far beyond anything his civilian success could provide. 3 months later, Marcus and I sat on his back porch in Richmond, watching Emma and Jake teach Connor and Madison the Korean martial arts forms that had impressed their classmates during International Awareness Day. The dynamic between our children had shifted completely. Instead of viewing Emma and Jake as somehow disadvantaged by their experiences, Connor and Madison now looked up to their cousins as sophisticated world travelers who possessed knowledge and skills that no amount of private school education could duplicate. "Sarah," Marcus said, breaking a comfortable silence that would have been impossible during our previous family visits, "I owe you an enormous apology for years of completely misunderstanding what you and David have been building for your family." I looked at my brother, noting the genuine humility in his expression that replaced the condescending confidence that had characterized his attitude toward our military lifestyle. "Marcus, you were operating with incomplete information. Most civilians don't understand the advantages that come with military family life." "It wasn't just incomplete information," Marcus replied honestly. "I was threatened by choices that I didn't understand and achievements that I couldn't measure by my own narrow standards of success. Watching Admiral Patterson interact with Emma and Jake made me realize that they're not disadvantaged military brats. They're exceptionally privileged children who are being prepared for opportunities that most kids never even dream about." He paused, watching Jake demonstrate a complex martial arts sequence that required both physical skill and cultural understanding. "And you're not a military spouse sacrificing your career for David's service. You're an international affairs expert whose experiences have positioned you for government service at levels that most civilians never access." The recognition felt like vindication, but more importantly, it felt like the beginning of a family relationship based on mutual respect rather than competitive judgment. Marcus had finally understood that different paths to success could be equally valuable, and that military service represented not a limitation of civilian opportunities, but an expansion of possibilities that extended far beyond traditional measures of achievement. As Admiral Patterson had predicted, Emma and Jake's military family background was indeed opening doors that most children never knew existed. Emma had been accepted into a prestigious international affairs summer program for gifted students, while Jake had been invited to participate in a cultural exchange program that would take him to South Korea to study traditional martial arts and international diplomacy.
But perhaps the most important transformation was in how Emma and Jake viewed themselves and their experiences. They no longer saw their lifestyle as something that required justification or apology. They understood that they were military brats in the best sense of that term, children who had been shaped by service, strengthened by challenge, and prepared for leadership in an increasingly interconnected world. The brother who had laughed at my military brat kids learned that those same children were the beloved grandchildren of a Navy Admiral, and that their experiences represented not obstacles to success, but advantages that money couldn't buy and connections that extended to the highest levels of American leadership. Sometimes the most profound lessons come not from winning arguments, but from discovering that the arguments themselves were based on fundamentally incomplete understanding of what really matters in building a meaningful life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.